I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Biotech stock staged a dramatic turnaround in 2025 with the XBI well outpacing the S&P 500 despite concerns over leadership changes at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the Trump administration's efforts to put constraints on drug pricing, and its broader cuts to health and science agencies. A pickup in deal-making along with falling interest rates helped buoy the sector with growing anticipation for continued improvement in 2026. We sat down with Adam Feuerstein, senior biotech writer for Stat, for our annual Review Preview edition, the noteworthy trends in the biotech sector in 2025, and what's in store at the upcoming JPMorgan Healthcare Conference and beyond in 2026. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Daniel Levine, always a pleasure.
It's not that I look forward to this simply because it means it's the end of the year, but I really do enjoy these conversations and appreciate you doing this as always.
We get to catch up every December. It's nice.
So as we end 2025 and get ready for 2026, what stands out to me has been the rise in biotech stocks, the pickup in financing and deals, and the rise we've seen in the XBI, which almost doubled from its bottom during the year and has really well outpaced the S&P 500. It's a nice change. It's
Yes.
remarkable given how dismal the start of the year was. How good a year has it turned out to be for biotech stocks and from a stock market perspective?
I mean, anyone should pull up a chart of the XBI, as you mentioned, which is the stock index that we most closely look at. And it's really remarkable because if you think back to early April, the XBI, I shouldn't say the XBI was down 22% for the year, right? I mean, it was the depths of despair. I mean, people were just talking to me as if the world was ending. And basically from that point at the beginning of April to today, it's been basically like a straight line up. And so right now, as you and I are talking, the XBI is up 37% for the year. So it's just an incredible swing in both like the value of stock prices and just sentiment. And obviously, we'll get into a lot of those sort of things that have happened, but tons of M&A. So I think, that's to me, you mentioned like what strikes you about this year. What to me is like just the highs and the lows, and the extreme highs and extreme lows that we've had this year in kind of in a relatively compressed time period. It has been remarkable.
And it's not just off the bottoms in April, but so much has happened just in the past 3 or 4 months where many biotechs you can look on a screen and find that have doubled.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been a year in which the performance or the outperformance has not been confined to like a certain type of biotech company or a certain size of biotech company. I think, you can kind of look across the board, maybe with the exception of kind of like the micro cap companies, which, always are kind of in their own little weird world. But really just, everything from the large caps, for the most part. And, certainly in like the small and mid cap range of companies have just, lots of companies doubled, tripled or more.
And in many cases, they were propelled by positive clinical developments. I think of a company like Turn Pharmaceuticals here. But what's happening? What's really driven this resurgence?
Well, if I knew that, I wouldn't be doing this job. I'd be investing, and then I would, and be living on an island somewhere. But I know I think it's hard to say exactly. It's hard to put a pinpoint one reason or another. I mean, I think certainly, I think some of the political and policy headwinds that investors and the sector saw or worried about early on in the year uh, just went away. Whether we're talking about tariffs, we're talking about drug pricing, these things have all pretty much worked themselves out in ways that have not impacted the bottom line or the business operations of most biotech and pharma companies, right? You and I are talking today. I think there's like 7, 8, 9 pharma companies, biotech companies that have just reached MFN agreements with the Trump White House today. We had some deals obviously earlier in the year. And I think what was noteworthy about those deals, like with Lilly and Pfizer, was that, they went in, they agreed to lower these drug prices, but yet they did not change their guidance, right? Financial guidance for either this year or next year, which kind of signaled to the street that you can make these deals with the White House and everything will be okay. And so I think that has contributed a lot to what we've seen. Investors are sort of recognizing and coming into pharma, coming into biotech stocks. And the other macro issue is just is probably interest rates. Interest rates have started to come down, and signals that we're going to have more rate cuts, and obviously that's beneficial. That's a tailwind for particularly for biotech, right? Which burns lots of money.
You say a lot of these issues have worked themselves out, but I wonder if there's an Alfred E. Newman aspect to this where people have just stopped worrying.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, look, I said, not all things are great going on in DC. I mean, maybe we'll get into this a little bit more detail, but the FDA is kind of a dumpster fire, and but again, I think from an investor standpoint, people have largely shrugged that off. I don't know if that's necessarily a wise thing to do, but so far, at least this year, they have.
And to what extent do you think? I mean, Wall Street likes to talk about the return of the generalist investor and their comings and goings in biotech, but is it more than just the strong clinical trial results? And is there a rotation going on where Wall Street needs to move money out of AI and find other places to put it?
Yeah, I think that has probably happened. It's always hard to quantify that, but I think you probably have seen more generalist investors. You have seen a rotation into biotech and healthcare, particularly as you've seen kind of the AI and tech stocks cool off, right? I think particularly in the latter part of the year, maybe let's say like the last 3 or 4 months, where we've seen biotech really outperform tech stocks, right? And you've seen some of the kind of the mania around AI starting to cool down a little bit. And I think so. I think that our little corner of the world has benefited from that.
One area that's really picked up has been deal making. As we're talking this morning, BioMarin announced it was acquiring Amicus for, I think it was $4.8 billion. There have been, I think, a total of $15 billion plus deals in 2025, including J&J's $14.6 billion acquisition of intracellular therapies, Novartis's $12 billion acquisition of Avidity, Merck's $10 billion acquisition of Verona Pharma. What role is deal making playing in bringing back interest in biotech?
Oh, I think that's been a big part of it too. It certainly has helped sentiment. It's helped. You think about these deals. Obviously, it's a big deal for the companies that get acquired. But then, if you think about the specialist funds that own these companies that acquired, that those billions of dollars then get reinvested into the sector. They have money to put into other stocks. So it's been a big deal. I mean, it's been a phenomenal M&A year. I think I don't have all the numbers in my head, but I think this is like the best year for M&A since 2019. And just including the deals that you mentioned, Danny, and then probably highlighted into one you did mention is, the Metsera deal, right? Where, I mean, we had Pfizer and Novo Nordisk essentially fighting over a company developing an obesity drug, right? Going back and forth, and the deal price eventually topping $10 billion.
I want to return to Pfizer and Novo a little later, but the other big story for me has been the FDA this year, which has been marked by chaos and turnover. Vinay Prasad was in, then he was out, then he's in again. George Tidmarsh is out, Richard Prosder is in, and then he's out again. Biotech has long been punished when there's regulatory uncertainty. That was the case early on in 2025, but there seems to be growing acceptance of FDA chaos and the belief that drugs will get approved and are getting approved. Is
I don't know if it's as much acceptance as this just sort of this I think people are just sort of pushing it aside, or like kicking the worries and the concerns down the road, because as you mentioned, maybe there haven't been as many tangible impacts. Like, we haven't seen a ton of drugs that haven't been approved. I mean, well, there have been, but I think maybe in a large part people think that, oh, this hasn't really impacted the drug review process or drug approvals. I think it has, and I think it's also much of what's happened at the FDA. You mentioned the highlights, but I think the stuff that sort of bubbles under the surface that's even more worrisome is just the massive numbers of people who have left the agency, either leaving because DOGE cuts early in the year, and then other reductions in force, or just people who are fed up, career scientists and kind of the staffers that basically make that place run, who have left, and we have done a lot of reporting. Stat has done a lot of reporting. Our FDA reporter Lizzie Lawrence has been just on top of all of this all year, and I think that those kinds of things are lagging, right? I think it takes a while for that sort of dysfunction to kind of percolate to the point where you start to see an impact. And I think we are starting to see that. I think we're starting to see some drug reviews miss their deadlines. We're seeing some controversial decisions, particularly in the CBER side, in the biologic, gene therapy, cell therapy side, where Vinay Prasad, as you mentioned, kind of is sort of getting involved in decisions. So, you usually ask me like, what am I looking for, or what do I worry about for 2026? That is one thing. The FDA kind of maybe finally stumbling and really showing the dysfunction. That's something that I think people should keep an eye on for 2026.
in pure numbers, it was a fairly good year for drug approvals. About 50 novel therapies approved by the end of the year. We'll have any standouts. What does it say about innovation? Are we seeing real breakthrough therapies, or is it just kind of a mediocre class?
I think it's been an okay year. I don't know. Help me out, Danny. Like, has there been a drug that approved this year that's like really a standout drug? I don't know. I think it's been kind of just like an average year, it seems like. And I think we've been, it's probably the drugs that haven't been approved or that have run into trouble that have been more high profile, like the whole Unicure situation with their Huntington's gene therapy, Replimune, some of those that have been more, I think that have kind of grabbed more of the headlines. But then there's the whole Sarepta situation that's gone on, with the Elevidys, their gene therapy for Duchenne. So those things are things that sort of are more top of mind to me than like, oh, this is like one great drug approval this year.
We have seen some progress with non-opioid painkillers.
Yeah. I mean, Jornavax, right, from Vertex. That was. I mean, the issues there around like, probably is that like a commercial? Is that going to be a commercial success? Think, but that's a good one to mention.
The GLP-1 story continued. Wegovy won expanded approval to include MASH. Ozempic won expanded approval in chronic kidney disease. And Lilly has had strong results for its once-a-day oral GLP-1. Is this class of drugs still a driving theme? And what are you watching in the pipeline behind what's already here?
Yeah, I mean, obesity has been, just an ongoing topic of fascination for people. We should mention that one of the highlights of this year was Eli Lilly crossing the $1 trillion market value threshold. They are the first healthcare company to achieve a $1 trillion valuation. That's something that like tons of tech companies do that, and multiple trillions. But here in our little healthcare world, Eli Lilly doing that, and obviously they are doing it largely because of Zepbound and and the obesity, the GLP-1, GLP-1 franchise, right? So we mentioned in Metsera, there's lots of deal making going on in obesity. So, the stuff like looking forward is, probably is now the oral, right? The oral GLP ones, right? That are coming. Novo has one, Lilly has one. I think, if what we're hearing is true, the Lilly oral GLP one, and I can never pronounce the name of the drug, so don't ask me to, but that approval will probably happen in the first quarter, maybe March. They're using one of those priority vouchers to kind of get a quick review. So that's kind of the next story, I think. And then, obviously some of the more novel or different targets, that some of the companies are pursuing for weight loss drugs. But, I think there doesn't seem to be any end to everyone's fascination with weight loss and obesity.
You did your annual Best Biopharma CEOs list. I think one of the themes of this year's list is deal making. Who made your list, and who were the standouts?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, I didn't pick a like a singular best CEO this year, just because it's a great year. So I felt like I should spread the joy around. But certainly, on the M&A side, you had Whit Bernard and Clive. Meanwhile, they are the CEO and executive chairman of Metsera. We mentioned you mentioned, Intracellular Therapies being bought by J&J for $14.6 billion. That was the largest M&A deal this year. So shout out to Intracellular CEO Sharon Mattis there. Sarah Boyce at Avidity they sold to Novartis. I thought that what's interesting this year on the M&A side is that, we have companies like Avidity who get bought. They're not yet commercial, but they're kind of on the cusp of being commercial. Sort of more R&D focused. But a company like Verona, David Zaccardelli, CEO there, they were bought by Merck, but again, because they've just done a tremendous job of selling the drug that they sell. So those guys were on there. I had Dave Ricks from Eli Lilly, as we mentioned, hitting he's the $1 trillion man, and so deserved a spot. I think I always try to find like one sort of unique or sort of maybe like kind of out of left field person to highlight on my best CEO list this year. And so this year, I added or included Natalie Hollis, who is the CEO, or was the CEO of Third Harmonic Bio, and they were not acquired. They actually shut down. And that was a decision. I thought that it was a very mature decision. It took guts to decide this is a company that had run into some trouble earlier in the year, and they had to make some really hard decisions about what to do with the company. We spent a lot of time this year talking about like the biotech zombies of the world out there. And Natalie and her board decided that it was in the best interest of their shareholders. It was the best interest of the future for their employees to wind the company down and return cash to shareholders. And I thought that was a really great decision. And so Natalie Hollis made my best CEO list for this year.
The one out of left field for me was Albert Bourla of Pfizer.
Yeah, he could have gone either way, man. He could have been on the worst list too. But I just felt like, I put him on there just because I felt like so much of like the pharma CEO job this year was to deal with Trump and deal with DC. And I just thought that Albert did a really good job doing that. I mean, he like flattered the guy. He went in there and he made deals that, didn't really hurt shareholders and may actually at some point actually benefit shareholders. So yeah, kind of maybe a little bit of a weird choice, but yeah, Albert Bourla.
So there were a few companies I'm curious on getting your take on. They have either been down or really lackluster, Pfizer being one of them. What do you think Pfizer has to do in the year ahead?
Well, it will help if those obesity drugs that they just bought for $10 billion pan out, right? I think, like with any of these companies that face these big patent cliffs and need to recharge and find new ways to grow, I think that is always that's the key. Just for a lot of these companies, maybe other than there are just very few pharma companies that seem to be able to do it internally, right? So, Eli Lilly maybe being one of the ones that seems to do that. But yeah, I think that that's the key to Pfizer, and I think they're sort of now well past the kind of the COVID cliff that's occurred. So. I know they put out they put out their guidance for 2026, which seemed to be in line with what people were expecting.
How about Nova?
Well, yeah, Novo is really interesting. I think people are sort of wondering what this new CEO, Mike Dudster, is going to do. Now that they have certainly fallen kind of behind Eli Lilly in the obesity race. They lost Metsera to Pfizer, or they clearly wanted that company, and so that's kind of maybe one of the burning questions for 2026 is what he does. We're actually going to be interviewing him, the Novo CEO, on our own podcast. Can I plug my podcast? Read out
Please.
loud.
Yeah.
So we will be interviewing Mike Dudster, the CEO of Novo Nordisk, for our JPM edition of the Read Out Loud podcast. So look forward to that.
The last one that's kind of top of mind, you mentioned the COVID cliff. How about Moderna?
Man,
Which has
Moderna
also been punished for politics.
has been, yes, and yeah, more for the mRNA, right? Which has kind of become this sort of scientific boogeyman. So, yeah, I mean, I think that again, maybe even more so. That's a company again, which is kind of, was sort of lauded for being this platform company, right? Where we thought that mRNA, people thought that the mRNA technology was going to sort of solve all of healthcare problems, and it hasn't done that yet. And obviously, while it's been sort of hit or miss effective across vaccines, they've obviously run into a lot of political headwinds when it comes to that. Which probably are not necessarily justified, but that's the world we live in, and so. Yeah, I think the struggle for them is to sort of figure out a way forward with their pipeline. We're all sort of waiting to see how the mRNA cancer vaccine, works out. They're in partnership with Merck on that. A lot of phase 3 studies are underway. I don't know if the first phase 3, which is in lung cancer, you're gonna have to check me on that, whether that's coming maybe late 2026. But that will be a very important readout for Moderna.
Before you published your worst CEO of the year, I had pulled a quote from your earlier reporting, which I'm going to read to you. Sarepta CEO Doug Ingram may lose his job for possibly running the company into the ground, but a more fitting punishment might be forcing him to stay put.
God, that was good. I wrote that. Man, I'm not so bad at this. Yeah.
Sarepta experienced the unfortunate death of 2 patients in its DMD gene therapy trial and a third in a trial in its limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, which used the same vector. It also saw
Right.
2 of its exon-skipping drugs that one accelerated approval fail in confirmatory trials. But the thing that really stands out to me is how the company managed the news flow around this. How would you say it's been handled?
I don't think they've handled it particularly well. There were a lot of issues and questions raised, about how transparent or not they have been about, when these deaths occurred and whether they were reporting it. I mean, some of the stuff that's happened, came out because of reporting, both from STAT and other news organizations, which reported on some of this stuff before the company admitted that they had happened. So I don't necessarily going to give them any credit for being particularly transparent about the process here. Overall, like I picked Doug Ingram to be as my worst CEO of the year, and I think it was a pretty obvious choice. And again, as I wrote, in the piece that, this is something that, again, this was sort of, it was regretful because, as you mentioned, we're talking here about these deaths that occurred, and particularly in, and not only that, but why, right? I mean, this is when we're talking about Elevidys, we're talking about a gene therapy that has never actually successfully concluded a clinical trial. Being able to show sort of definitively that there's just efficacy. There's been some safety issues, and those safety issues, particularly the liver tox, has kind of come, and that is what caused the acute liver failure that caused the deaths in those in the boys that we talked about, and older boys too, who are more vulnerable to these kinds of things because need higher doses of the gene therapy. So we will see. Like 2026 will be interesting for Sarepta because while they were able to get Elevidys back on the market for the younger boys with DMD, the ambulatory boys, they still is not on the market for non-ambulatory, and we'll just have to see. That they're trying to put some mitigation treatments or regimens in place from to see whether or not they can mitigate some of the liver tox. And we'll just have to see what transpires there. The company really has kind of shifted. Like they're maybe they've got that Arrowhead partnership, and some of that data from early data from those drugs we're going to see some of that in 2026. So Sarepta might start looking to be a little bit of a different company.
Well, let's talk about the upcoming JPMorgan conference and beyond. How different is the attitude and expectation going into this year's conference from a year ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would imagine that expectations are going to be higher, right? I think if we go back about a year ago, expectations were pretty low, and I think for that reason, people left JPM 2025 or JPM 25 fairly happy because maybe people went into it thinking, oh, it's not going to be so great. With success comes higher expectations, and so. If we all get there and there's not a ton of deal making announced and there's not a lot of good news announced, then, maybe we all leave not feeling so good. We'll have to see what happens. I think a lot of the sentiment early on in the year is set by that conference, and particularly just on the sort of the news flow that happens both kind of in the week leading up to JP Morgan and then, kind of the Sunday, Monday of the meeting. Because that's when everyone sort of floods the zone with with press releases to reporters, chagrin because we have to deal with all that stuff. But we'll see how it goes. I mean, I'm going to be there. I don't know, I've lost count of how many years I've been at JP Morgan, but it's a lot.
Are there any companies you're really looking forward to hearing from this year?
I'm good. I think there's a few, kind of for me, sort of looking at some of the companies that have kind of some of the more important, maybe data readouts early on in the year. Xenon has one. Ocular Therapeutics is another one that has big phase 3 studies coming, kind of early Q1. One company that everyone is, well, actually everyone, but a lot of people are focused on is Abivax. And I think that's a company where people are expecting them to be acquired. And so if a deal doesn't happen by JPM, I think there's going to be some grumbling about that. So it's just, it's always, I mean, I think about JPM and I'm like, oh, it's like it's a crazy week, but at the end of the day, it's fine. And then we all move on.
And are you expecting any kind of a blockbuster deal announcement this year?
I mean, I don't have anything lined up. Haven't heard anything yet. I mean, it's maybe a little bit early. But we'll see. Again, it's always hard to say. There's been so much M&A coming into the end of the year that, sort of logically a pause is not, wouldn't be surprising, right? I mean, we've had just a ton of deals. And the same thing goes with the stock prices. Like, we mentioned, how incredible it has been, particularly towards the end of the year. And I think even in December right now, we're starting to see kind of a little bit of a breather. And that's not surprising. People are kind of starting to tune out. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see, a little bit of a sell-off. And, maybe there will be, kind of a, maybe there won't be a ton of deals, and then that'll pick up again. It's just, it's always hard to predict those things because, like 2024 was not such a great deal, not such a great year for M&A. And even in the beginning of the year, other than that J&J Intracellular deal that came early, it wasn't all that great. And then by the summer, it was like every week there was a deal being announced.
Both drug pricing and the future of the Affordable Care Act are in play heading into the new year. Are you watching for anything on that front?
Well, like I just mentioned, and like we mentioned, there was just, as we were recording this, there's a bunch of companies who just agreed to MFN deals with the White House. And there's probably a few more stragglers coming in. I think we've heard that, J&J is probably going to do a deal maybe next week. So, that's something to watch. I don't necessarily think that these are any, like, from a kind of a business standpoint, they don't seem to be impactful. I haven't seen the details of the deals that were announced just now, this recent round. But if they sort of, if they're true to form with some of the ones that have already been announced, it doesn't seem like these are impactful. And I think that that's kind of how Wall Street has viewed these deals. They've been sort of more relief than that they're sort of in the past, and that all that kind of uncertainty is behind everybody.
Are there other big themes you're going to be watching in 2026?
I think, again, probably just around the FDA is the thing. That's the thing I most worry about, and just how impactful it will be on companies. I think because it gets very difficult. The uncertainty at the FDA and the lack of consistency is something that I think companies have a hard time to dealing with, right? I mean, you really, you're talking about, R&D and drug development programs that require, a lot of planning, and it's really hard to do these kinds of things when you don't know what's going on at the FDA, or you're having meetings with the FDA and you're hearing one thing, and then months later, you hear something exactly the opposite. So I think that, to me, is something that, well, I think everyone should be keeping an eye on, and I will be keeping an eye on, and as will all of my stat colleagues.
And we're in the early years of a patent cliff. Is that going to drive deal making in 2026?
I mean, it has already, right? I mean, a lot of the deals that were done, again, 2025, second biggest M&A year since, biggest year since 2019. So I think, and that's being driven by loss of exclusivity, patent expiring, pharma wanting to reload, and seeing biotech, drugs, both kind of, proof of concept or late stage development companies, or commercial companies, companies that, have been able to sell drugs successfully. I think that's kind of one of the things, it used to be, the old saw was, short the launch, right? That, that biotech companies couldn't sell drugs. But I think that's changed. You're seeing lots of smaller companies now able to sell drugs very successfully on their own. And if they do it really well, then maybe even then they get acquired, right? Verona is a good example of a company like that. Intracellular is example like that, a company that's done that. So, I think that I think these companies have gotten more mature, more sophisticated, and they're able to do it.
One of the things it's hard to believe, as we're recording this, we're still only in the first year of the Trump administration. We've seen big cuts to research, an assault on science,
Yes, we are.
cutbacks at science and health
Yeah.
agencies. You talked about your concerns with FDA, but will this have long-term effects on the sector and driving innovation?
I mean, I think it will if it continues. This is the stuff that, talk about sort of a lagging, things that take a while to sort of percolate up. these deep cuts in research funding, deep cuts at the NIH, impact on, sort of academia. These have very negative downstream effects for, this is kind of the proving ground for where a lot of the innovation and a lot of the science gets its start. And so, if that's kind of cut off, it's definitely a worry down the road. I think the biotech and pharma industry have kind of, I don't want to say they've ignored it, but, I think that they've maybe not worried about it as much. But it's definitely something long-term that is a concern.
Stat will be in San Francisco for JPMorgan. You've got a half a dozen colleagues who will be there. Stat will be hosting 2 events, 50 years of biotech and healthcare at a crossroads. Both of these will happen on January 12th. Details can be found on the Stat page. Anything to note about either of those?
Yeah, we do some really nice events around JPMorgan. I will have 2 investors on stage at our event on Monday evening. I've got Rod Wong from RTW Investments and Augusta Mojitas from Janus Henderson. They're 2 of, I think, 2 of the more insightful, really successful long-term biotech specialists, investors, and so we'll be talking about what their outlook and for 2026 and sort of what they worry about and what they're happy about. I'm looking forward to that, and I think my colleague Matt Herper will have Alnylam CEO Yvonne Greenstreet on stage, and I can tell you, Danny, we have a special guest lined up for our Monday event. I can't tell you who it is, but it's a good one. It's a good guest. And so stay tuned for that.
And the podcast, if you want to hear more of Adam, it's The Read Out Loud. Look for it on your preferred podcast platforms. Adam Feuerstein, senior biotech writer for Stat. Adam, happy and healthy New Year to you, and thanks as always.
Danny, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.